Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friends, Dr. Kurt Thompson, MD, and producer Amy Chella. We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known.
Hi, Pep. Hi, Kurt.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Pep. Oh, my gosh. We have to practice
You
this.
two are like deer in the headlights.
This is what I'm supposed to say. Am I supposed
This is like our very first recorded episode.
Okay, I want to see what Pep would do. I'm going to do Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friends, Dr. Kurt Thompson and Pepper Sweeney.
And my friends, Amy Chella and Dr. Kurt Thompson, MD.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
Sounds like an intro that will not end. I think we've got it.
So I'm going to throw it, right?
Oh, we're going to do it again.
Yes, because we're going to get it right. Amy, you're going to go next.
And
I think this should be all part of the recording.
Yes. Here we go.
Why
Ready?
are we doing this
I've
again?
already forgotten what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, I don't say welcome again. I'm
gracious. Never mind. You know what?
That's right. I got it.
Has started.
Listen, okay, we've started.
And my friend,
no.
Dr. Kurt Thompson.
No, I can't. I can't even.
No,
I can't even.
It is like the first episode ever.
Folks, we are here today. There are three of us, whether that's good or bad. We haven't quite decided yet, but there are three of us here.
I've decided. With
you today. And we are in the midst of our series on rupture and repair. And today's episode is on tears in the fabric, social structures, and the reconciliation of Jesus. Kurt wrote Tears in the Fabric. Which
actually, I wrote Tears in the Fabric, and I said social ruptures and the reconciliation of Jesus, but that's okay.
And what did I say?
You said social structures. It's okay. Look, I realize Amy is throwing everything off.
Listen to the tape.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's try it again.
Go ahead.
Okay. Tears in the Fabric. It could be tears, but it's Tears in the Fabric. Okay.
Yeah.
This is really about a follow-on to the last two episodes. We focused 2 episodes ago on what is it like for us to live in the social system of the church and how do we repair ruptures in that context. The last episode was really about what about the social structures in which we live culturally regarding our castes and how we commit violence. Those who are in a position of greater power commit violence toward those who are in a position of lesser power. And now we're taking a little bit of a different angle on this question of how we, many of us in our listenership, like we're aware and we hear conversation about this, about what we would consider to be growing, grief-filled and even violent distance between social groups. And when I say violent, I don't mean that everybody is getting out their handgun, although some might be doing that. We're really talking about the way we treat each other with violence, with our words, with our posturing, with our rhetoric, with all kinds of things that are taking shape across generational lines. How often do I hear people in my particular kind of demographic, my age and so forth, talking about generations that are 2 generations behind me in certain ways, in which it's pretty clear that my folks are not in conversation with folks who are in their 20s or 30s. We're just easily talking about them, and perhaps vice versa. We also have lots of, particularly here I live just outside Washington, D.C., where there is no end to the ruptures that are taking place politically, meaning that the ruptures are being defined in those terms. We've talked about how even the political ruptures take shape within the religious contexts of our time. Those who are politically aligned in one way finding themselves in certain religious groups and vice versa. And then the social structures around what we believe around sexual ethics, for example, as just another way in which lines are being drawn in terms of like, how do we actually live with one another? And, we could go into a lot of detail. Again, we could spend hours talking about the social science behind some of these things, hours talking about how the data is shaping up about why people gravitate to their homogenous groups, why they end up in echo chambers. But there are some things that I think that's common for us to recognize, that we don't need to go into all those details. Look, we all kind of are aware that those 4 categories that we've described, and others that we can come up with, are doing a couple things in common. One is that we are wielding violence. And by violence, I mean any time we are using shame or contempt in the way that we think about, imagine, tell a story about, even in the privacy of my own mind, or talk with somebody else about someone else. Like, I can't believe you voted for Trump. I can't believe you voted for Harris. An example. I have this idea in my mind about who the other is. And immediately, like, the emotional state within me that I am foisting upon the other is one of violence. That, of course, is primarily coming out of my own place of fear. And it's so much easier for me to talk about the other as the problem than it is for me to name that I'm afraid and that I'm ashamed and I'm confused and I don't know what to do. Because to say that are acts of great vulnerability. Because how do I say that to someone who I have a story that I'm already telling in my mind?
Right.
Is going to take advantage of my vulnerability.
Yeah. We don't want to be vulnerable in situations where we don't feel safe. This is interesting. Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah.
Right. You know, we find that when we commit violence, wielding shame, and we do so quite often in the context of those systems that are very much like us, we find that pretty soon we actually lose ourselves in this sea of sameness. Mm-hmm. When I'm only talking with, whether that's on my phone, or whether that's the newsreel that I'm watching, and that I only watch this particular newsreel, and so forth and so on. When I'm only doing that, one of the things that I'm doing is categorically other than what the biblical narrative calls for. We repeatedly come back, male and female, right? We're to be different. We get to Genesis chapter 9, 10, 11, and the Tower of Babel. What did they want? They wanted all of themselves to be the same, so that they could wield power in this way as a block of power. And this is what Babylon was going to do. What did Babylon do with every territory that it conquered? It took the cultures there and it took them to Babylon, and it inserted them into the Babylonian culture so that they would lose their culture. They would become like Babylon. Everybody's going to be the same. We're all going to look the same. Because it's far more difficult for me to actually do the work of creating beauty and goodness in the world with people who are different than me. And so we find ourselves in these echo chambers, and yet here's the interesting thing. What we often don't recognize is that when we remain in those pods of people who are just like us, an interesting thing happens neurobiologically to us. Now, I don't know if you all are aware of this. There were experiments done back in the 1950s, in particular, 50s and 60s, that were desensitization experiments, in which people were put in settings in which they would put them in suits in which they were very tightly connected to their skin, so that their skin couldn't move and feel anything. And then they would put them in a pool of water that was still that they couldn't have a felt sense of gravity. Everything was dark. They couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, couldn't feel anything on their skin, and had a very hard time moving. And so essentially were absent any input coming from the outside. It was typically a matter of, it might be a matter of a couple of hours, but usually it's long periods of minutes or hours before people would start to become psychotic. They would start to have auditory and visual hallucinations. They would have they would have tactile hallucinations. And the whole point that we're saying is that in order for me to flourish in the world, in order for the human eye pays attention to differences in the world. We have what we call micro movements of the eye, of the globe of the eye, that are moving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth at nano and micro distances. We can't see it with the naked eye. You can't see it. But the reason is because the way the eye knows that something is there is because it's measuring the delta between 2 points, moving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. If you actually held the eye absolutely still, you would stop seeing things. We pay attention to novelty. We pay attention to difference in the environment. When I don't have anything touching my skin to tell me that there's a difference, but I don't see difference, I don't hear difference, something starts to happen in my brain. When you extend this to relationships, at some point, as much as I want to be with the people who are just like me, you find this happens in all kinds of societies in which people are so homogenous that at some point they begin to have all kinds of interpersonal challenges. Because I actually am made to be with those with whom I have difference. Now, in the short run, when I have distress with those with whom I have difference, I certainly want to be with those who are just like me. Until I discover that actually, when I'm only with those who are like me, I start to get bored. I get a little stir crazy. It's like why it is that I need more cocaine and more cocaine and more cocaine. Because you just give me the same thing. It stops doing for my brain what I need it to do. And so we don't often recognize that my rage, my psychosis will eventually emerge. Give me enough time. When I am with something that is only like me. And so what we do then with technology, we have this way of I'm just going to be the echo chamber of sameness. But then with technology, I can do this so much more easily because I can disembody myself from others. Right? It begins with a wheel, right? Yes, I can plow more ground, but I can also then move 5 miles away from you because you don't have a wheel, you can't get to me. And this is like C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, where hell on earth was this place, this state in which people just built their houses further and further and further apart from one another. And this is what we do now with our technology. And so we can move apart, we can create ruptures with our words, with our violence, with our rhetoric. And, let there be no doubt. Violence is being perpetrated in my city. Regardless of what one thinks about how the world should be run politically, I will tell you, I watch it happen every day, that the way things are being done in my city are small and large acts of violence. They're not using guns, but they're using rhetoric and postures and so forth and so on that are uncalled for. And the real question that we have to come to terms with is, am I willing to pay the price that I need to pay to have the life that I claim that I want to have? I want to have a life of flourishing. I want to have a life in which I'm actually with people. I want to have a life of goodness and beauty. But to do that, I have to be in conversation, in the room, face to face with people with whom I have great difference. And so we have to create ways in which I come to the table, in which I can embody the repair. And so we think where are the fracture lines? It's not that hard to find them. Where are the fracture lines? Where are the ruptures? Oh, my guess is that you could probably do a quick poll in your church. You could do a quick poll in your community with people that you might think are different than you in some respects. And what would it be like for me to begin to have a relationship with you? So first of all, we're just going to have, we're going to have tea or cocktails in the afternoon. I'm going to invite you over to my porch. Friday, it's 5:30. We're just going to hey, I just want to get to know you about all these things, right? And so we're going to move at the speed of God, which is, you read the Bible and God moves much more slowly than we would like him to move in everything, right? You look at the history of Israel, gosh, how long did they wait for Messiah? How long was Abraham waiting? How long was Adam waiting, asleep, after Eve is created? Who knows? Like, God is taking his time. So we're moving at his speed. We feel the urgency of this, but it's going to take time. And we have to commit to living in the age to come, the one that Jesus says has begun and is here, one relationship, one moment at a time. Being with people with whom we can name our longings and name our griefs. We've talked about this over and over again, that we can begin to employ some of those primary tactics that we've talked about in previous episodes. We are then going to live into our longings and our griefs. We're not just going to name them. We want to say, I want to have a better relationship with my neighbor who I think voted differently than I did. And I want to say to my neighbor, I really want to be more connected to you. And that's going to be the driving force. I'm not going to let the story that I tell in my head about who you voted for and who I voted for to be the driving force of this narrative. I'm going to let Jesus be the driving person in this narrative. I'm going to make sure that shame is not part of this conversation. We're going to live into our longings and into naming both of our longings and our griefs, and we want to create beauty and goodness together. And we can tell story after story after story. I have friends. You have friends who, things are said on the internet about people that are unconscionable. Things are done in one sphere to other people who are in another sphere that are unconscionable. And so we are people who are called, first of all, to prayer. We are going to be people who are going to pray into our longings and our griefs. And we might even consider, when we talk about our application, what is it going to mean for us to be people of reconciliation, people of repair of those ruptures, especially even with those who are sisters and brothers who follow Jesus within the church, across those caste lines that we talked about in our last episode, and now across these other lines in which our social fabric is being torn. And may we be the weavers that weave together these torn pieces of fabric in places where we really need it.
So this is great. I'm. It leaves me wanting to know, or wanting to be clear. For you to tell me so that I have it clear in my head. The goal, where a lot of people would jump into a conversation with someone that's on the opposite side of whatever issue than them, would think the goal is to change their mind,
right? Convert them,
let them know where they're wrong, and convert them to my side.
Well, this gets back to some fundamental things that we often talk about back in episodes about confessional communities, when we talk about the difference between process and content. And we might think that, we're coming here to talk about politics, or we're coming here to talk about sexual ethics. And what I'm really here to do is to talk with you. The most important thing that's happening here is that I want to hear what it's like. I want you to tell me your story. Tell me how you came to vote for who you voted for. Tell me your story. I don't want you to talk about the candidates. I want you to talk about, you voted for a particular candidate. Tell me your story. And how your story came to a point where that's what you did. You believe certain things about sexual ethics. Tell me your story. And in that moment, right here and now, the most important thing that's happening, Pep, we were talking earlier about this notion that you want to be a listener. I want to hear your story. Because what's happening here is, like, you're absolutely right. we're not here. The repair of the rupture is not the resolution of political differences. It's not coming to the same conclusion about an abstract topic. It is about, I want to feel more connected to you 45 minutes from now than I feel right now. I want you to be more connected to me 45 minutes from now.
Yeah.
And we have so little practice doing this that it's not even within our cultural imagination to consider that these ruptures are actually, as we've said about from the very first episode of this series, we are looking for ruptures to repair.
Yeah.
These ruptures become powerful opportunities for us to witness how the Holy Spirit is doing things within me and between me and the other that demonstrates that the Spirit is way ahead of and way behind of and beside and above and below what we consider to be the topic, the issue, and is really in the process of trying to turn me into somebody. The Spirit is not perhaps trying to get me to be correct about all the things, as much as he's trying to turn me into a person who lives like the Sermon on the Mount and who bears the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, that's
Kurt,
really helpful.
Kurt, you mentioned it. We've talked about that we were made to create beauty and goodness. And
Right.
you mentioned in just now that of creating beauty and goodness for the person in front of us. And it was like that. And if to the degree that we're able to, if we're not able to, then what is it that then there's a rupture? There is. And so it's not knowing, talking about who we voted for, but it's like Pep, like you said, it's knowing, it's almost like what they voted for, because there's a story behind that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In some respects, we're saying what part of you was telling a story that you imagined would be resolved if a particular person were in office. Right. But it's not really about the person who's in office. Yeah. We're really talking about what's the part of the story that has felt afraid, that has felt worried, that has felt ashamed, that has felt whatever it is that we're feeling. And in this way, if I'm more committed to having these kind of embodied conversations, and I'm willing to turn my phone off when it comes to these kinds of issues, I will, stop paying attention to the imagined fracture lines that we have. And when I say imagined, I don't mean that they don't exist, but like that exist they also are like taking up real estate in my imagination. And I am actually going to then fill my imagination with the things that are actually happening, that I'm actually doing in real time and space with other people's real lives here and now. And that becomes the world that I actually occupy, not the world that is created on my phone.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. And we have an application for you folks for this week. So after listening to this episode, is there a social category we explored, or maybe one that we didn't name, that brings to mind a rupture that you've experienced with someone in your life? Maybe there's a name or a face that rises up for you. If you're in a place where it feels possible, consider gently opening a conversation with that person about where things stand between you. This kind of connection takes real courage, and especially if in this world that we're living in right now. So be honest about your longings, be honest about your fears. And if even that feels like too much right now, which we understand for sure, try this. Imagine yourself at a table with Jesus and that person sitting beside you. What do you picture Jesus saying to them? What does his tone of voice sound like? Now, if that feels like it's more than you want to do right now, then just begin with a prayer. Ask God to bring to mind the people with whom you carry a rupture. Trust that he is already holding a vision of reconciliation, even when you can't see it. And as always, let your journal be a space where the Holy Spirit can meet you, speak to you, and gently lead you forward. We appreciate you listening, the most beautiful listeners in the world that you are, that you all are.
Oh, dude.
And I appreciate the time that I got to spend here today with
Yeah.
Dr. Desire, and Chilla Chilla. I love you guys.
So good.
Love you too. Thanks, everybody.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.